band will be present.
Food and Beverage Festival at home 8 and 9 better
There will be live performances by Gambian artists, drummers, acrobats, singing competition, eating competition, wrestling competition, and many more. Prepare yourself for local and international cuisines, for they will be there in abundance. Entrance fee is only $100. Proudly sponsored by Banjul Breweries and
Welcome back. Russia has deployed tens of thousands of security forces to protect the Winter Olympic Games that opened today in Sochi, but concerns still remain high. On Thursday, the US banned all liquids, aerosols and powders on board flights to Russia. The move came after intelligence suggested that terrorists may conceal explosives in toothpaste tubes. CNN's Brian Todd finds out how damaging that report can be.
Tube can be powerful and potentially deadly. This bomb in a toothpaste container blew off a car door, sent parts of it across the quarry in southwestern England, where CNN commissioned this test with the help of Sidney Alford, an expert who helps first responders understand explosives. What kind of damage could this bomb do?
I wouldn't like to be in an airplane in which that exploded, not even a big one.
For this test, Alford used an explosive called RDX, a white crystalline powder. He mixed it with another ingredient to create a paste. In this container, he filled about 3/4 with his explosive concoction, the rest with toothpaste.
It smells and tastes like toothpaste. I have presented this in such a way that somebody giving it a casual inspection will probably pass it.
The size of container Alford used is the kind you have to place in checked baggage. But Alford says 2 smaller containers this size, which you can carry on, can also be used. These tubes would have to be attached or placed very near each other to cause a similar explosion. They can be detonated by a heat source. Bombs that were successfully smuggled aboard U.S.-bound airliners in recent years show just how real the threat can be. This is what prosecutors say the 2009 underwear bomb would have looked like if it had gone off. Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab had snuck it onto his flight, landing at Detroit in 2009 by concealing it in his pants. And this is one of 2 printer bombs that were found before they exploded aboard cargo planes bound for the U.S. In a reconstruction for CNN, this is what Alford said one of those printer bombs could have done.
If that had been part of an airplane's fuselage, then heaven help the airplane. That would have been a terminal event, I'm afraid.
Alford's demonstrations, then and now, used 2 different types of explosives, which had similar effects. A toothpaste bomb has brought down a plane before. In October 1976, anti-Castro Cuban operatives hid explosives in a tube of Colgate and brought down a Cubana Airlines flight over the Caribbean. More than 70 people were killed. Brian Todd, CNN, Washington.
After 9 years behind bars, convicted drug smuggler Chapelle Kobe has been granted parole. Back in 2005, the Australian woman was found guilty of trying to smuggle 4 kilograms of marijuana into Bali. As it remains unclear when she will be released, let's look back on the trial and the media frenzy that has surrounded the case in Australia.
27-year-old Australian beautician who'd just touched down for a beach holiday on the island of Bali.
The customs officer said, whose boogie board bag? I said, it's my boogie board bag.
Inside that bag, officials at Denpasar Airport found more than 4 kilos of marijuana.
And I swear, by God is my witness, I did not know the marijuana was in my bag.
Throughout her 2005 trial, Chapelle Kobe maintained her innocence. Her lawyers argued that drugs were planted, possibly by airport employees involved in drug trafficking.
I believe for 7 months, which I've already been imprisoned, is severe enough punishment for not putting locks on my bags.
What Kobe called a simple mistake turned into a 20-year sentence when a panel of 3 judges decided they didn't buy Corby's story. The sentence, well short of the life term prosecutors had called for, and the maximum penalty, death by firing squad. The trial heavily covered by Australian media, who scrutinised every twist and turn, often overwhelming Corby and her family. Corby's sentence sparked outrage across a country that largely believed she'd been set up and stoked fears that other young Aussies headed to Bali and other tourist hotspots across Southeast Asia could be next.
So sorry for her, I'll give her all the support we can.
I'm not going to leave her stuck there for 20 years. It's insanity.
Fears that were reinforced with the 2006 conviction of the so-called Bali Nine, a group of young Australians jailed in connection with trying to smuggle 8 kilos of heroin off the island. Indonesian authorities continue to defend their justice system. Corby has spent around 9 years behind these walls at Bali's Kerobokan prison, with regular visits from her sister Mercedes and her mother, continuing to maintain her daughter's innocence.
Why would you admit to something that's not yours?
After exhausting courtroom appeals, Corby appealed for clemency after a medical exam diagnosed her as suffering from acute depression with psychotic symptoms. And in 2012, Indonesia's president issued a decision that shaved 5 years off Corby's 20-year sentence and laid the foundation for her parole application.
How are you feeling?
And while some Indonesians have accused the authorities of giving Corby's case special attention, the country's Justice and Human Rights Minister says she's being treated the same as everyone else.
Rains have submerged villages, killed some people and stranded 40,000 others. The most urgent need is food and water. The government has declared a state of emergency, with the army helping in the evacuation of victims. CFI has more.
Villages here are completely submerged. Since September, rainfall in Bolivia has been 5 times higher than average. Floodwaters have isolated communities and endangered livestock.
The most urgent need is food and water for the entire community. And we need to have our animals moved to higher ground.
Some 40,000 people have been stranded by the floods, and nearly 40 have perished. About 100,000 cattle are in danger, and 6,000 hectares of crops have been destroyed. The most severe flooding has occurred in 4 departments in the center and north of the country. On Monday, the government declared a state of emergency and sent in the armed forces to evacuate flood victims. Some areas, however, are still inaccessible.
We had to wait a long time to be evacuated because the planes couldn't land. The runway was full of water.
With the rains expected to continue until mid-March, the current floods could prove more devastating than the 2007 El Niño floods, which displaced nearly 500,000 people.
Bolivia takes us to our second break. Take leave of you, a quick reminder of the day's top stories. The Vice President and Minister of Women's Affairs, Dr. Esatunjai Sedi, today reiterated the position of the Gambia government in forging genuine partnerships that augur well for the interest of the country. Russia has deployed tens of thousands of security forces to protect the Winter Olympics in Sochi, as the U.S. banned all liquids, aerosols and powders on board flights to Moscow. And counting the cost, torrential rains have submerged villages in Bolivia as the army helps in the evacuation of tens of thousands of people stranded in floodwaters. That was all in this edition of the news. Thanks for the pleasure of your company. Do stay with GRTS.
The Gambia Tourism Board proudly presents the second edition of the Food and Beverage Festival in the Smiley Coast of Africa, the Gambia. Date on Saturday and Sunday, February 8th and February 9th,